Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Friday, the 19th of July in London. I'm Caroline Hepker. Coming up today, Donald Trump delivers his first public address since surviving an assassination attempt, reflecting on the shooting and pledging to help forgotten men. Meanwhile, President Biden's grasp on the Democratic presidential nomination appears to be slipping, as reports suggest Obama has now weighed in. Plus, difficult decisions ahead, an exclusive first broadcast interview after becoming the UK's first female Chancellor. Rachel Reeves says that she will level with the public about challenges facing the economy. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Donald Trump has delivered his keynote address at the Republican National Convention as he accepted the party's nomination for the presidency. In a speech that veered between calls for unity and divisive rhetoric on a range of topics, Trump began by describing his near-death experience during last Saturday's attempted assassination.
If I had not moved my head at that very last instant, the assassin's bullet would have perfectly hit its mark, and I would not be here tonight. We would not be together.
After recounting the details of the attempt on his life, Trump launched into a broad pitch for a second term as president that started with a call for the country to come together.
Despite such a heinous attack, we unite this evening more determined than ever. I am more determined than ever, and so are you. So is everybody on your side. Our resolve is unbroken and our purpose is unchanged to deliver a government that serves the American people better than ever before.
However, the speech went on and Trump delivered an increasingly meandering and grievance-focused address with sweeping pledges to cut taxes, bring down inflation, end illegal immigration and to stop foreign wars. But notably, he only directly addressed the current US president once by name.
What this administration, the damage that this administration has done, and I say it often, if you took the 10 worst presidents in the history of the United States, think of it, the 10 worst, added them up, they will not have done the damage that Biden has done. I'm only going to use the term once. Biden. I'm not going to use the name anymore, just one time. The damage that he's done to this country is unthinkable. It's unthinkable.
At more than an hour and a half, Trump's was the longest nomination acceptance speech by a Republican or Democrat in the modern era. It brings to a close a Republican convention that has been buoyed by a steady stream of polling showing Trump ahead of Biden on key issues for the November election. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is facing increasingly public warnings to quit the presidential race from top Democratic lawmakers and supporters. That's as aides insist that the president is not wavering and remains dedicated to running whilst he continues to isolate with COVID-19. Blackstone executive and billionaire Democratic donor John Gray says that he hopes Biden thinks about the demands of another term.
The president is a good man. He has been a wonderful public servant. And like Speaker Pelosi said, you know, he's gotten the votes in the Democratic primary. This is his decision. But I would hope he considers the really extreme physical toll of this business, of this job, I should say. I'm going to wait and see what happens here on the Democratic side. I am a Democrat, but I'm going to let the process play out.
Blackstone's John Gray speaking there. Perhaps the harshest blow to Biden's campaign comes from former President Barack Obama. The Washington Post reported that he told allies that Biden needs to seriously consider the viability of his campaign. According to a Senate aide, Democratic senators in competitive races are on the verge of calling on the president to step aside, the only question being when and how to announce their position. Now, the prospect of a second Trump presidency is pushing European leaders to cooperate more closely on security. Trump has a long history of being critical of NATO and, in the eyes of many European officials, is now the clear favourite to win the race. The Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Store, was asked by Bloomberg how Europe would cope if any next US president withdrew their support from Ukraine.
I think the idea that, you will be all in or all out, I think that's a bit too simplistic. NATO is of great benefit to all members. I think for your American president to have 31 of the world's most advanced states as allies working very closely is a huge asset. I don't see any American president want to renounce on that.
The Norwegian leader speaking there to Bloomberg on the sidelines of the European Political Community Summit. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, for his part, implored those leaders at the summit to, quote, convince your partners around the globe that they also have to be brave. Now on to some other news. The French lawmakers have re-elected a centrist candidate from Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party to lead the National Assembly. Yael Braun-Pivet's reappointment could be a sign that the president's coalition is best placed to form a new government after Parliament was dissolved last month. Braun-Pivet won the vote by 13 ballots with support from centrist and centre-right lawmakers outside of her alliance. Her election is not directly related to the appointment of a new French Prime Minister or the formation of a new government there, but it could give an indication of which coalitions are able to unite behind a single candidate. US central bankers are reportedly ready to cut interest rates in September amid growing confidence that price stability is within sight. Recent speeches from policymakers have teased the coming move, and Chair Jerome Powell is likely to flag the change more explicitly after a policy meeting at the end of July. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco President Mary Daly talked about lowering borrowing costs and the progress that has been made towards that, but was cautious.
We've had some really good incoming data, but even with the incoming data on inflation being positive and a good data after earlier this year, we're not there yet. We don't have price stability right now, and we need to be very confident that we're on a sustainable path to achieve it.
Mary Daly speaking there during a fireside chat with the New York Times' Gina Smialek. Officials still want to see a continuing trend towards their 2% annual inflation goal before committing to rate cuts. The Fed's preferred gauge has eased, though, to 2.6%. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves has a warning that difficult decisions lie ahead. In her first major broadcast interview since taking the job, she told Bloomberg that she was under no illusions about the challenge for restoring economic growth.
We're going to have to make difficult decisions. We need to fix the foundations before we can start rebuilding things in Britain. But unlike the previous government, I am going to be honest about the scale of the challenge. I'm going to level with people, and together we're going to rebuild our country.
It's a hint that Reeves is weighing the prospect of tax hikes or spending cuts in her first budget this autumn. Britain's first female Chancellor was also keen to stress that her growth plan depends on global investors returning to the UK. One of her first acts was to introduce legislation preventing any future Liz Truss unfunded tax cuts. And lastly, Englishman Daniel Brown is the surprise clubhouse leader going into the second round of the Open Championship Golf. He is 6 under par at Royal Troon, a stroke clear of 2019 winner Shane Lowry. Several big names didn't make such good starts, though. Rory McIlroy's on 7 over, with the two-time PGA champion Bryson DeChambeau and Tiger Woods among other players who are well off the pace. Now, Donald Trump delivered his first public address since surviving a failed assassination attempt. Now, Trump called for unity for tax cuts, closing the US border, ending what he called the Green New Scam, and foreign wars. All of this as the Democrats are mired in debate about whether President Biden should quit the race. Joining me now to discuss this is Bloomberg's Bill Ferries. Good morning, Bill. Thank you so much for your time. Look, this was the build-up, the main event at the Republican National Convention. It was former President Donald Trump accepting the nomination to go ahead and run in November. He began by talking about the assassination attempt against him. He called for unity, but then also pivoted to this isolationist, anti-immigrant American vision. What was your impression of what was a very long speech, Bill?
Right. It went on for actually over 90 minutes, and there was a lot of anticipation. It was really the first public remarks we were getting from former President Trump since that assassination attempt that wounded him last weekend. And it was really a mix of clearly kind of prepared remarks and a lot of impromptu riffing off the away from the teleprompter, kind of a pattern familiar to those of us who have watched many of his rallies that often start off this way and then kind of digress onto sidetracks. It was a speech that I would say was perhaps a little lower energy than what we've typically come to expect from Donald Trump, and a little bit short on policy specifics. I mean, he did, as you say, he did talk about a little bit about tax cuts. He talked about ending subsidies for electric vehicles. He really harked back to, I think, what people's memories are of the U.S. economy before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. He talked about low inflation and low unemployment. I think Democrats will counter that they are now back in that kind of an environment of relatively low inflation and low unemployment, although prices have risen a lot in between. So he tried to, I think he tried to talk about how he would take the American economy back to the way it was running in the second half of his term before COVID, but not a lot of details in terms of a specific vision for the next 4 years.
Yeah, and one could even say sweeping promises, sort of almost impossibly sweeping promises. For example, incomes will skyrocket, he said. Inflation will vanish and jobs will come roaring back. We will usher in the rich and wonderful tomorrows. I mean, big sort of sweeping statements. How does Trump plan to achieve that with his policies?
Yeah, well, that's where all the details weren't really a part of this speech. I think he's really trying to focus on, he's going back to that Ronald Reagan adage of asking people if they feel better about where they are now than they did 4 years ago. And let's say 4.5 years ago before COVID. He's trying to bring back some of that nostalgia. But no, in terms of, a policy address, we did not get, what his priorities would be, what his first 100 days would look like. He's, I think, essentially trying to capitalize on frustration that many Americans feel about where their household economy is at the moment.
Republicans have also been buoyed by the polls. Does Trump have momentum, or is it that Democrats are losing and disarray? Because even though there was huge fanfare around this Trump speech that took place overnight, it was also overshadowed by the conversation that the Democrats are having. When, if, will President Biden quit the race?
We heard Trump mention Joe Biden's name once or maybe twice in that whole speech. And you wonder if that was deliberate because the Republicans are hedging their bets on who their opponent will even be at this point. There's a lot of mounting speculation that Joe Biden will possibly end his campaign. You see more senior Democrats coming forward and saying that they think it would be best if he stepped aside. And that includes kind of a devastating comment or reporting in the New York Times that former President Barack Obama is saying that Joe Biden's campaign has a risk of hurting Democrats at this point. So we have reported on the Associated Press has reported that there is an all-hands meeting for the Biden campaign staff expected on Friday, U.S. time. And that, adds a little bit more speculation to this process of whether Joe Biden, who's sidelined with COVID-19, will really be the candidate Republicans have to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. A last thought, if you would. I think it would be amiss not to mention that there was quite a lot of religious content within the speech. He also talked, Donald Trump, that is, about saving democracy. Neither he nor J.D. Vance, his running mate, seem all that committed to accepting a vote that would go against them, or there may be question marks about that. And the idea of sort of saving democracy has also been at the heart of the Democratic kind of push too.
Right. This seems to be the Trump campaign trying to take one of the arguments against it and turn it around on the Democrats. Donald Trump has said that he believes the judicial system has been weaponized against him with the number of cases he has had to fight back against since leaving office and even actually while he was in office. I think that's. The focus on religion that you mentioned, that is a clear pitch towards a lot of these working class voters who could help decide this election either way. But J.D. Vance, when you go back to talking about the election system, J.D. Vance has said that if he were in Mike Pence's shoes in January 2021, he probably would not have voted to immediately validate the election. So that's where the back and forth over who was really undermining democracy and who would strengthen democracy is at.
Yeah, Bill, thank you so much for your time and for being with me this morning. Bloomberg's Bill Ferry's there. Now, Trump promised new heights of greatness for America. Joining us now to discuss is Thomas Gift, who is Associate Professor of Political Science at UCL and the Director of the Centers on US Politics. Thomas, good morning and welcome to the programme.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Trump is making sweeping promises. No enemy will doubt our might. Our borders will be totally secure. Our economy will soar. How can Trump deliver? What did you make of the speech and the policies that he outlined?
Well, it was really a tale of two speeches, I think. The first part in which he was recounting his assassination attempt, and he said that he would only do this once because it was so painful. And then the rest of the speech was kind of a typical Trump speech where he was ad-libbing much of it. He did call for unity, but at the same time, he accused his opponents of cheating on elections, called Nancy Pelosi crazy, talked about the quote-unquote China virus, the quote invasion at the U.S.-Mexico border, called one Democratic Congress member a total lightweight. So there was certainly some discrepancy there. I think a lot of Americans were actually expecting a speech that was a bit more unifying. In terms of policy, I think you highlighted some of the big issues, immigration, certainly at the top, and bringing down the cost of living.
Yeah. In terms, though, also of foreign policy, Trump said that he got along well with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He also sounded quite isolationist and quite transactional. How does the rest of the world, do you think about this speech, or what will they take away from it?
Well, I really think that it's nothing new. I mean, we know, for example, on Ukraine, Trump has promised to end the war on day one. He's never actually said how he would do that, but that's his promise. And the way that Trump governed was very incompatible with collaborating with allies on the international stage, for sure. I mean, he took the United States out of the World Health Organization during the middle of a pandemic. He attacked NATO. He said that he would allow Putin to do whatever he wanted in Eastern Europe. So I don't think that world leaders are going to be too surprised by much of the content that they heard in this speech.
OK, but how will people prepare, for example, for things like climate policy? Trump saying that he would drill, baby, drill, end the electric vehicle mandate on day one, redirect money from Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. And so, in his words, we will not allow it to be spent on meaningless green new scam ideas. What happens to climate policy under a second Trump term? Again, this is something, that's very vital, or seen as very vital by European leaders.
Absolutely. I think Trump is going to be very difficult to work with. I mean, he's just not open to collaboration on these ideas. Trump is going to roll back a lot of environmental regulations domestically through unilateral action via the Environmental Protection Agency. He's going to probably do what he can to curb some of the outlays that have already been provided for through the Inflation Reduction Act, through the infrastructure bill. It's a pretty predictable set of policies if you're a Republican, but for world leaders who are prioritizing climate change, it's not something to welcome.
Okay. The speech also had quite a lot of claims about his successes in office. I mean, for example, he touted the biggest tax cuts ever. He blamed the Democrats for inflation and for foreign wars. In terms of the European view on how well Trump did in office looking back. What do you think the conclusions are for his, prior term in office?
Well, that's a big question. When it comes to inflation, this is something that the entire Western world has really dealt with since the pandemic. Of course, you can make the critique that Biden in particular exacerbated that through increase in federal spending, which were significant, at a time when the economy was already overheating. But Trump's record also is a little bit difficult to assess simply because it ended during the height of the pandemic. So much of the economic success that he touts, particularly in the stock market, dissipated by the end. Lots of jobs that were created under his administration were eventually eliminated. Many of them returned under the Biden administration. So it's a mixed record for sure.
The thing is, will Trump's message actually be welcomed in some parts of Europe? I mean, you can see some parallels in terms of anti-immigrant, the concern around inflation, the idea that a kind of globalized world has not worked for working people. I mean, those are themes that we've seen from many right, centre-right, far-right parties across Europe. So would some of those messages be welcomed?
Oh, 100%. I think that they will be. I mean, the UK is somewhat of an exception. It's moving left at the time that much of Europe is moving right. But what we've seen here, a common theme is just kind of an anti-establishment sentiment, one that is skeptical of globalism, one that is skeptical of elites, one that is skeptical of the ability of multilateral institutions to deliver, particularly in the context of globalization, where automation and offshoring are curbing jobs. So I think certainly there's a non-trivial fraction of the population throughout Europe that is going to welcome Trump's rhetoric.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.